Hello, I'm Mariam Mashiri. This is the Iran War Today, and over the next 15 or so minutes, we'll bring you up to date on all you need to know on day 47 of the US-Israel war with Iran. Well, let's start with some of the day's key developments now. The White House says a second round of peace talks with Iran is being discussed as Donald Trump reiterates his belief that the war in Iran is very close to being over. Hours after a historic round of talks between Israeli and Lebanese officials, there are fresh cross-border strikes between the IDF and Hezbollah. The Israeli Prime Minister has convened his security cabinet. Iran threatens to block trade through the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman if the US continues to blockade Iranian ports and shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. And in some of the strongest language from the British government so far, the Chancellor says she's frustrated and angry the US entered the war in Iran, in her words, without a clear exit plan. Well, the White House says conversations with the Iranians are ongoing and are so far productive days after talks broke down in Pakistan. But the White House press secretary denied reports the US has requested an extension to the 2-week ceasefire that expires a week from today. In a news briefing earlier, an Iranian foreign ministry spokesperson also confirmed the two sides were exchanging messages and said Iran would be hosting officials from Pakistan today to discuss in greater detail the opposing positions of the US and Iran. Well, let's start, though, with the latest comments from the White House press secretary, Karoline Leavitt, on the prospect of a new round of talks.
I saw some reporting, again, bad reporting this morning, that we had formally requested an extension of the ceasefire. That is not true at this moment. We remain very much engaged in these negotiations, in these talks. You heard from the Vice President directly and the President this week that these conversations are productive and ongoing, and that's where we are right now. I've also seen some reporting about the potentiality for in-person discussions again. Those discussions are being had, but nothing is official until you hear it from us here at the White House. But we feel good about the prospects of a deal. The President mentioned that in his interview yesterday, and it's obviously in the best interest of Iran to meet the President's demands. I think he's made his red lines in these negotiations very clear to the other side, and so we are continuing to see how these conversations go.
Well, let's go live now and speak to our correspondent in Washington, Simi Jalosho. And Simi, what more have we learned about the potential of a new round of talks between the US and Iran?
Yep. So we heard from the White House press secretary there, Karoline Leavitt, who seemed a bit optimistic with regards to broader talks between the US and Iran. She said that she feels good about the prospect of a deal, that discussions are ongoing about a second round of talks, and that they are likely to be in the same place in Islamabad again, and that the Trump administration wants the talks to continue through the Pakistanis, whom she and President Trump have been very complimentary of. On Monday, we heard from President Trump, who said that the second round of talks are likely to happen this week, and that the first round of talks they went well, he said, and that most points were agreed upon, apart from one. He said there was one sticking issue, and that was Iran's nuclear ambitions. In this press conference, we also heard from the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, who spoke about Operation Economic Fury, who he said that complements the military blockade in the Strait of Hormuz that's been orchestrated by the US. And he also spoke about secondary sanctions against any country doing deals with Iran, buying oil from Iran, and also sanctions against banks that are facilitating the movement of Iranian money.
And Simi, new reporting in the Washington Post regarding more US troops being sent to the Middle East. What is the Pentagon saying?
Yeah, so there's that reporting in the Washington Post that the US is sending an additional 6,000 troops with their aircraft carrier, the USS George H.W. Bush, and that they will arrive in the coming days, as well as 4,200 additional troops that will arrive at the end of the month. We've reached out to the Pentagon, who simply said there's nothing to provide due to operation security. But if true, they'll be joining the estimated 50,000 personnel that the Pentagon has said is already operating in the Middle East in its military operations against Iran. And this all comes, as I mentioned earlier, that the US attempts to exert economic pressure on Iran into a deal and into reopening the Strait of Hormuz. This would give the US more military options if the ceasefire doesn't hold and if talks between the US and Iran fail to either continue strikes against military targets in Iran or potential ground operations in the future. But as I mentioned earlier, the White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt seemed optimistic about a second round of talks between the US and Iran.
OK, Simi, thank you. Well, we're into a week now into the ceasefire, actually, between the US and Iran. But for millions of Iranians, life has by no means returned to normal. Despite an ongoing near-total internet shutdown, BBC Persian continues to receive messages from people inside the country. They've been speaking about growing inflation and increased economic pressures, as well as fears the war could restart. Well, the Norwegian Refugee Council is one of the very few international humanitarian organisations currently operating inside Iran. Their spokesperson, Marche van Ramsdonk, told the BBC's Newsday programme today about the extent of the damage she's witnessing in Tehran.
Here in Tehran, which is a huge city with over 10 million people, many buildings have been destroyed and some neighborhoods are unrecognizable with buildings gone. My colleagues also are sharing horrific stories. They live across Tehran and also in cities like Isfahan and Mashhad across the country. They've been very close to attacks, to missiles falling, hearing those sounds with having their roofs and windows shaken and a huge impact with only a few blocks away. So the bombardment had been very intense and very traumatizing for a complete population.
Well, Israel and Hezbollah have continued to attack each other a day after Israeli and Lebanese officials held their first diplomatic talks in over 3 decades. Reports suggest 30 rockets have been fired towards northern Israel, while at least 9 people have been reportedly killed in Lebanon. Meanwhile, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has convened a cabinet meeting this evening, saying he's instructed the IDF to continue their operations in southern Lebanon. Our correspondent Nick Beek has been reporting on the day's developments from the town of Metula in northern Israel. He had this analysis of what he'd witnessed.
We're right in the north of Israel. You can see Lebanon just over the border. Beyond the fence there, some communities that are now abandoned, people left during previous rounds of fighting. What we've seen since we've been here today in this specific place is what we've heard, actually, mainly. It's been the loud booms of Israeli artillery firing over the border towards Hezbollah positions, the Israelis say, in the south of Lebanon. A short time later, there have been pretty loud explosions that have been reverberating through this hillside. The Lebanese authorities saying that 9 people have been killed in Israeli airstrikes today. The Israeli authorities here saying that Hezbollah have continued to fire. They counted more than 30 rockets being launched across the border. And actually, Hezbollah said today they were targeting 10 different places in northern Israel. So while we're talking about this ceasefire between the United States and Iran, precarious as it may be, that is in place. But certainly here, on this front, on this border, the conflict continues. There was some polling that was carried out over the weekend, and it gave you an indication into the different sentiments that people are feeling here in Israel. In terms of the action continuing against Hezbollah, people do seem to be supportive of that. They talk about a threat that needs to be dealt with so that people, particularly in the north, can live in peace. That would be what they tell you and what people have been telling us here in the past 24 hours. Also, it does seem that most of the population are against a ceasefire. And this is where it gets a bit tricky, because they say they would have liked the fighting to continue against Iran, but they think at the same time the war aims that Prime Minister Netanyahu put forward have not been achieved in any meaningful way. And certainly his opponents have said that really the 3 main aims he had: to get rid of the ballistic missile capability, to put an end to the ambitions or the capability that Iran may have in terms of a nuclear program in the future, and also regime change. Those 3 have not been realized. Mr. Netanyahu has said that huge achievements have been made and that Israel is changing the face of the Middle East. So that's an indication of what people are thinking and feeling here in Israel.
Well, let's turn to that fresh threat from Iran, who vowed to blockade the Red Sea and 2 other crucial shipping lanes if the American blockade of the Strait of Hormuz continues. US Central Command said it's completely halted Iran's sea trade, but analysis from BBC Verify showed several Iran-linked vessels transiting the strait, while other ships reportedly changed course following instructions from the US. Here's Ben Chu from BBC Verify.
Is the US blockade of Iran working? Well, first it's important to clarify what the blockade is. Now, Donald Trump initially threatened a blockade of any and all ships trying to enter or leave the Strait of Hormuz. This was his Truth Social post on Sunday, the 12th of April. But that's not what has been implemented. What actually came into force on Monday, the 13th of April, was an attempted US naval blockade on ships entering or exiting Iranian ports. And it said that it would not impede other vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz. Now, a version of this was posted by the US Central Command. It shows a map of the Iranian coastline, and this red line is the blockaded area. The Strait of Hormuz is here. Now, some key Iranian ports are inside the Gulf, notably Kharg Island, Iran's main oil export hub. So tankers from here would have to pass through the Strait of Hormuz to get to the open seas. But some Iranian ports are outside the strait, such as Chabahar, which is here in the Gulf of Oman. On Verify, we've been using ship tracking data to monitor the effectiveness of the US blockade. And we've tracked 2 Iranian-flagged vessels leaving Chabahar since the blockade began. And of the 15 vessels that have crossed the strait, 9 have links to Iran, with 6 having previously visited an Iranian port. Now, on Tuesday, the 14th of April, US CENTCOM said that no ships had made it past the US blockade and that 6 merchant vessels complied with direction from US forces to turn around to re-enter an Iranian port on the Gulf of Oman. We haven't been able to confirm this, and part of the problem is that the US military hasn't specified the geographical extent of the blockade, so how far it extends out to sea. So we can't independently verify whether any relevant vessels have gone past it. Although ship tracking data does show that at least one sanctioned tanker, which is Chinese-owned, crossed the strait in an eastern direction and then turned back. What we can say is that we've not seen any evidence from the available tracking data of a fully laden tanker carrying oil or other petrochemical products heading out from an Iranian port into open sea since the blockade began. Though a note of caution about that ship tracking data, which is based on ships' transmitted radio signals. The picture it gives us is not fail-safe, as vessels can simply switch off their transponders to go dark, and in some cases may broadcast false positions to disguise their true location.
Whether you're joining us on YouTube, on TikTok, Sounds or TV, thank you so much for your time. We're back at the same time tomorrow with the Iran War Today.